The envelope was heavy, embossed with gold lettering that caught the light like a cruel joke. Monroe Estate, family dinner, attendance required. The same stationer my father had used 16 years ago to send me my disownment letter. The same thick ivory paper, the same smell of arrogance. I turned it over in my hand, feeling the weight of the past pressing against my fingertips. Attendance required, just like when he required me to disappear. My assistant Mason leaned against the glass wall of my office, tablet in hand, watching me carefully. "That looks expensive," he said. I gave a humorless smile. "My father never did anything cheaply, not even cruelty." He hesitated. "Are you going to go?" I leaned back in my chair, the San Francisco skyline glowing like liquid gold behind me. 16 years. 16 years since Charles Monroe looked me in the eye and told me I was finished not just in his company, but in his life. "Family dinner," I said softly, tasting the words like something spoiled. Funny how family only remembers you when they need saving. Mason folded his arms. "Maybe it's time to let them see who you became." I met his gaze. "They'll see. That's exactly why I'm going. My name is Rachel Monroe, at least it used to be. These days, I sign everything as Rachel Reed in memory of the man my father's company killed. 16 years ago, a gas pipeline exploded at a Monroe energy plant because my warnings were ignored. My husband Daniel was one of the engineers on site that night. I buried him with nothing but a burnt wedding ring and a corporate apology. The next morning, I stood in my father's office demanding accountability. He told me I was emotional, irrational, unfit for business. By noon, I was escorted out by security. I walked out of that glass tower with no money, no family, no job, just a notebook full of equations and a burning need to prove him wrong. Solvian Tech started in a garage with 2 interns and a dream of clean, safe energy. Now it's worth more than Monroe Energy ever was. And last week, I quietly signed the documents giving me controlling interest in his company through subsidiaries and private equity networks he didn't even know existed. My phone buzzed Mason again. "The merger papers are ready for the board review," he said. "All we need is your signature after next week's vote." I looked at the envelope again, the gold letters mocking me from my desk. "Funny," I murmured. "He thinks he's inviting me to dinner. He's really inviting me to his reckoning." Mason's voice softened. "Rachel, you sure you're ready for that?" I stood, straightening my blazer, the reflection of the skyline sharp in the window. I've been ready for 16 years. I slipped the invitation into my bag next to the folder marked Confidential Monroe Acquisition Phase 4. For a moment, I allowed myself to remember Daniel's laugh, the smell of machine oil on his hands, the warmth of a life that could have been. Then I closed the memory like a file I couldn't afford to reopen. Grief had been my fire once. Now it was my weapon. "Book the flight to Boston," I told Mason. "First class one way. You want me to come?" "You'll wait outside the estate," I said. "If I'm not out in 2 hours, you know what to do." He nodded. "Send the press release." "No," I said, walking toward the door. "Send the notice to the board first. The press gets it after dinner." As the elevator doors closed behind me, I caught my reflection composed calm, but the eyes gave me away. 16 years hadn't dulled the anger. It had only refined it. For the first time since the explosion, I was walking back into Monroe territory, not as the broken daughter they had discarded, but as the woman who now owned the very empire that had buried my husband and my past. And this time I wasn't asking for justice, I was delivering it. The flight from San Francisco to Boston felt shorter than it should have. Maybe because I spent most of it staring out the window, rehearsing the lines I'd never said 16 years ago. Outside, the sky burned orange above the clouds, a color that reminded me too much of fire. When the car turned off the main road and onto the private drive leading to the Monroe estate, my breath caught for just a moment. The mansion loomed ahead exactly as I remembered: stone walls, arched windows, manicured hedges, and the same suffocating air of pride. Time had not touched this place. Neither had humility. The driver slowed as the wrought iron gates opened, creaking like a warning. In the distance, I saw 2 familiar cars parked in the circle drive: my father's black Rolls-Royce and my sister Isabel's sleek silver Jaguar. both symbols of inherited power, not earned success. I pressed my fingers against the leather seat, grounding myself. "We're here, Ms. Reed," the driver said. I smiled faintly at the name. Rachel Reed. It still felt strange, but it was the only name that carried peace. I stepped out, heels crunching against the gravel. The air smelled of cedar and old money. A new butler, tall, nervous, unfamiliar, opened the front door before I could knock. "Miss Monroe, welcome home," he said politely. "Mrs. Reed," I corrected without hesitation. His eyes widened slightly, then he nodded. "Of course, Mrs. Reed. The family is waiting in the study." The study. The same room where my father once told me I was an embarrassment to his name, where Isabel had smirked from the corner, satisfied to see me exiled. I followed the butler through the long marble hallway. The portraits lining the walls had changed, new paintings of Isabel at charity galas, award ceremonies, glossy magazine covers. My face, once in a family portrait near the grand staircase, was gone, erased as though I had never existed. My hand brushed the empty patch of wallpaper where the frame had hung. Fitting. The study doors were open. I paused on the threshold, taking in the room that had haunted my nightmares. The heavy mahogany desk, the crystal decanter of whiskey, the clock that never stopped ticking through every argument. My father sat behind that desk, now older, grayer, but still holding himself like a monarch. Isabel lounged on the leather sofa, her designer suit immaculate, her smile rehearsed. My mother Elaine sat quietly by the fireplace, hands folded, eyes down, still playing the part of silent peacekeeper. "Rachel," my father said, rising to his feet. His voice carried authority even when it trembled. "Thank you for coming." I lingered at the doorway, refusing to move further. When the great Charles Monroe requests my presence, how could I refuse? My tone was cool, measured, the kind that made his jaw tighten. "Let's not start with sarcasm," Isabel said, crossing her legs. "We're here to talk business, not emotions." "You never had much of either," I replied. The tension crackled. My father gestured toward the armchair opposite him. "Please, sit. We have much to discuss." I stayed where I was. "I prefer standing." A flicker of irritation crossed his face, but he didn't push. "Monroe Energy is facing difficulties," he began. "We've suffered some financial setbacks." I almost smiled. Some. That was one way to describe a collapse. Isabel leaned forward. "We're looking for a strategic partnership. Your innovations at Solvian Tech could be exactly what the company needs." My eyes narrowed. "You mean the company that dismissed my ideas as childish 16 years ago?" My father exhaled. "We all made mistakes." "No," I said softly. "You made decisions. I lived with consequences." My mother's voice trembled for the first time. "Rachel, please." I looked at her, and for a brief second I saw guilt flicker in her eyes. I straightened my posture, calm, controlled. "All right," I said. "Let's discuss your proposal. I'm curious what family loyalty is worth these days." Silence fell. Somewhere the clock ticked louder. The empire that had rejected me was collapsing, and none of them knew that I already owned it. The study smelled exactly as it had 16 years ago. Leather oak and a trace of my father's cologne that clung to everything like arrogance preserved in glass. Charles Monroe looked up from his desk as I entered, the weight of years etched into the lines around his mouth. But his eyes, those cold, assessing eyes, hadn't changed. He stood slowly, hands on the desk. "Rachel," he said, as if testing the sound of my name for the first time in years. "You look successful." His tone made the word sound like a warning. "I am," I answered simply. Isabel turned from the window, her diamond earrings flashing in the firelight. "You really came," she said, voice honeyed with disbelief. "I told Dad you wouldn't. Not after the scene you made all those years ago." "Scene," I repeated, stepping closer. "That's what you call burying my husband while you toasted another Monroe Energy quarter." Isabel's perfect smile twitched. "We all suffered losses." My gaze hardened. "You didn't lose anything. You inherited the empire built on that explosion." Charles cleared his throat, the sound cutting through the tension. "Enough. We're not here to reopen old wounds." I smiled without warmth. Old wounds don't heal when the knife is still in the same hands. Elaine shifted uncomfortably by the fire. "Rachel, please," she whispered. I looked at her, the mother who had watched my exile in silence. Her eyes met mine for only a second before sliding away. My father gestured toward the chair in front of him. "Sit. Let's talk business." "Business," I said softly, moving closer, but not sitting. "That's what family means to you, isn't it?" He ignored the jab. "Monroe Energy is facing difficulties." "Difficulties," I echoed. Isabel jumped in the words, flowing too quickly, rehearsed. "We've hit some operational headwinds, but nothing that can't be managed. We just need an innovation boost, something new, green, sustainable. That's where you come in." I tilted my head. "And why would I help the company that destroyed my life?" Charles's jaw tightened. "Because it's still your family's name, your mother's legacy, your future." "My future," I laughed softly. "You stripped that from me the day you chose Isabel." Isabel's eyes flashed. "You were never ready. You were too emotional, too idealistic. You didn't understand the responsibility of running a global operation. You mean the responsibility of covering up negligence," I shot back. The color drained from her face. Charles slammed a hand on the desk. "Enough, I won't have this turned into a courtroom. We made mistakes, yes, but we're trying to move forward." I folded my arms. Forward into what bankruptcy? For the first time, Isabel's mask slipped, a flicker of fear. "I saw it. We're restructuring," she said quickly. "It's temporary." "Temporary," I repeated, turning toward the window. The reflection in the glass showed 3 ghosts behind me, a family that once was. "Funny," I murmured. "So was my marriage." Silence followed, heavy and suffocating. My father finally said, "We're offering you a partnership. You'll have control over the new sustainability division. Full autonomy." I turned to him, studying the man who had once told me I'd never be more than a sentimental engineer. "A partnership," I said slowly. "You're offering me a share of a sinking ship." Isabel bristled. "You think you're better than us, Rachel, but you're just the same. You built your company on ambition, too." "No," I said, meeting her eyes. "I built mine on the ruins of your ambition." My father's gaze hardened. "If you refuse, Monroe Energy won't survive another quarter." "Then maybe it shouldn't," I replied. "Maybe it's time something better took its place." His eyes narrowed. "And what exactly are you implying?" I smiled faintly. "You'll find out soon enough." The clock on the mantel clicked louder, marking the seconds between our words. I looked at them, the powerful man, the perfect daughter, the silent wife, and realized they still saw me as the broken girl who left in disgrace. They had no idea the woman standing before them had already bought their empire piece by piece. And the irony was exquisite. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the slow, steady ticking of the antique clock above the mantel, a metronome for the tension filling the room. I studied my father's face. 16 years had carved deeper lines into his skin, but not softened him. The same iron posture, the same belief that power justified everything. "You've done well for yourself," he finally said. "Solvian tech has been impressive." I raised an eyebrow. That almost sounded like a compliment. "Don't mistake acknowledgement for approval," he said coldly. "You built something decent, but remember, you learned from me." I stepped closer to the desk, my voice quiet but sharp. "No, Father. I learned from your mistakes." His jaw clenched, a muscle twitching near his temple. Isabel smirked from the couch. "Still dramatic, I see." I turned toward her. "Still delusional, I see." Her smile faltered. "You're angry because you weren't strong enough to stay." "I was strong enough to walk away," I said. "You stayed because you needed his approval like oxygen." "Don't pretend you didn't," she shot back. "Everything you've done, all this success, it's just one long tantrum for Daddy's attention." The words hit harder than I wanted to admit. I looked at my mother. "Do you hear her?" I asked. 16 years later, and she still thinks ambition is rebellion. Elaine's lips parted, but no words came. She looked down the firelight flickering against her wedding ring. "Rachel, this isn't helping anyone," she murmured. "We need to move forward." I laughed softly, bitterly. You've been saying that my entire life, Mom. Move forward, stay quiet, don't upset him. How's that working out for you? Her shoulders stiffened, and I saw the faint shimmer of tears she refused to let fall. My father's patience snapped. Enough, he barked. I will not have my family torn apart by ancient history. Ancient history, I repeated. Is that what you call the night I buried my husband because of your company's negligence? His face paled, but he didn't answer. Isabel shifted uncomfortably. I pressed on. You told the press it was a tragic accident. But I read the internal report, Father. The one you sealed. You knew the safety valves were faulty. You signed off anyway. You don't understand the pressure we were under, he said, voice rising. We would have lost millions. You lost something far more valuable, I said quietly. Your soul. The silence that followed was brutal. My father sat down slowly, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for the glass of whiskey. He took a long sip, the ice clinking against crystal. Isabel tried to recover the ground. We didn't call you here to fight, she said. We called you because we need you. Her voice softened, feigned sincerity coating every word. Despite everything, you're still a Monroe. You still belong here. I met her gaze, steady and unflinching. Belong. You erased me from every photograph in this house. I glanced toward the wall where the family portrait had hung. You made sure I didn't exist. She looked away, her silence answering for her. You talk about family like it's a brand, I continued. But you don't understand what family means. Family protects. Family listens. Family doesn't destroy one of its own to save face. My father's voice was low, almost tired. You came here for revenge. No, I said softly. I came here for closure, and what will closure cost us? Isabel asked, her tone mocking but her eyes uncertain. Everything I said. And you're about to find out the price. My mother whispered, Rachel, what are you planning? I turned toward the door, pausing just long enough to look back at them. You'll know soon, but when it happens, don't call it revenge. Call it accountability. I walked out, the echo of my heels the only sound left in the room. Behind me, the family that once destroyed me sat in silence, and for the first time I saw something new in their eyes. Not anger, not pride. Fear. The next morning, the estate's east wing felt like a mausoleum pretending to be a mansion. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, but everything inside remained cold. Isabel was already in the breakfast room when I walked in, scrolling through her phone, perfectly composed. You're up early? She said without looking up. Did you sleep? I don't sleep well in houses where ghosts roam the halls, I replied. Especially when some of them are still alive. Her eyes flicked up, a flash of irritation crossing her face before the practiced smile returned. Dad wants to see you in the study. Of course he does. Charles Monroe was waiting, papers spread across the desk. Rachel, he began. I've been reviewing our numbers. We need a strategic infusion of innovation. Your technology could save this company. His tone softened, almost rehearsed. You've proven yourself capable. I'm offering you a partnership. I raised an eyebrow. Partnership. After 16 years of silence, that's your word of choice. Don't be melodramatic, he said. This is business. I crossed my arms. Business is built on trust, Father. You burned that to ash. Isabel entered behind me holding a tablet. Let's be reasonable. Solvientech is doing well, but Monroe Energy has infrastructure legacy reach. Together, we could rebuild. I turned slightly. You mean you could survive? That's not fair, she said quickly. We've had setbacks, yes, but the foundation is solid. Solid, I repeated, walking toward the desk. Your stock dropped 72% in 12 months. 3 divisions shut down. And your last carbon capture project failed so publicly that investors are pulling out faster than you can lie. Her lips parted in shock. How do you know? I interrupted. Because I've been watching you. All of you. Charles stiffened. You've been investigating us. I prefer the term preparing, I said. You taught me that preparation is everything. He bristled. Don't twist my lessons against me. I leaned forward slightly. I didn't twist them. I perfected them. The room fell silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the antique clock. Isabel stepped closer to her father. Dad, this isn't helping. We came here to work with her, not fight. Then, to me, she said, "Rachel, this company means everything to us." To him. She glanced at him, her voice faltering. "You know what losing it would do." I studied her face. For the first time, I saw cracks in her confidence. Dark circles under the eyes, a tension in her jaw she couldn't hide. Maybe for her failure wasn't just financial. Maybe it was personal, the end of her identity. But pity was a currency I didn't spend anymore. "What are you really asking me for?" I said quietly. Charles sighed, the arrogance thinning. "Help us save Monroe Energy. Join forces with us. Bring your technology. We can rebrand together." Monroe Solvion Technologies. The name made me almost laugh. "You'd put your name first." "Of course," Isabel said quickly. "It's tradition." I smiled thinly. "So is your hypocrisy." Charles stood abruptly. "Enough of this attitude. You've made your point. Name your terms." I took a deep breath, letting the silence stretch. "My terms," I said slowly, "are simple honesty. Every figure, every debt, every hidden liability." Isabel hesitated. "That's not necessary." I cut her off. "Then neither am I." For a long moment, no one spoke. My father's expression hardened again, the old pride flaring back. "You're still the same, always pushing, always defiant." "And you're still the same," I said softly, "always underestimating me." I turned to leave, but stopped at the door. "You wanted me here for business. You'll get business, but not the kind you expect." Their confusion followed me down the hall. I could almost hear it, like a storm gathering behind closed doors. In less than 24 hours, everything they thought they controlled would belong to me. And the best part was they had invited me to dinner to make it happen. By the time dusk fell over the Monroe estate, the air inside had turned thick with anxiety. I could feel it in the way the staff avoided eye contact, in the way Isabel's voice echoed too sharply down the corridor, and in the way my father's study door was now always closed. They knew something was unraveling, even if they didn't yet know how fast. I walked into the study without knocking. Charles looked up from a pile of financial statements, startled. "Rachel, you can't just—" "I can," I said simply, setting a slim leather briefcase on his desk. "And you'll want to hear this." Isabel was there too, pacing near the window, her phone clutched like a lifeline. She turned, ready to attack. "If this is another lecture—" "No," I said, flipping open the briefcase. "This is business." I placed a set of bound documents on the desk, the thick stack landing with a satisfying thud. The letterhead gleamed under the lamp, Solvion Tech Acquisition Division. "What is this?" my father asked, reaching for the papers. "The future of Monroe Energy," I said. "You're welcome." He frowned, scanning the first few pages. The color drained from his face. "This can't be right." Isabel leaned over his shoulder. "What is it?" "She's lying," he muttered, but his voice was unsteady. It says I interrupted that Solvion Tech, through multiple subsidiaries, has acquired a controlling interest in Monroe Energy. As of next week's board meeting, this company will be under my leadership." Isabel grabbed the folder, flipping through pages in disbelief. No, that's impossible. You couldn't." "I did," I said calmly. "Every share you sold to cover debt, every private investor you thought you could charm, those shares now belong to me." My father slammed the folder shut, the sound cracking through the room. "You planned this." "No," I replied evenly. "You planned this. You built an empire on exploitation and arrogance, and you left it vulnerable. I just bought what you neglected to protect." Isabel's voice shook with fury. "You tricked us." "No, Isabel," I said softly. "I learned from you." My father rose from his chair, his anger trembling at the edges of fear. "We'll fight this. We have lawyers." "Yes," I said, meeting his eyes. "The same lawyers who helped structure my acquisition. Turns out loyalty can be bought." "Another one of your lessons, wasn't it?" His mouth opened, but no words came. Isabel stood frozen, her fingers clutching the edge of the desk as if to stop herself from falling. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "You told me once I'd never understand business, that I was too emotional, too naive. But I understood it better than you ever did, because I learned that real power isn't about legacy, it's about control." My mother appeared in the doorway, pale and trembling. "Rachel," she whispered, "what have you done?" I turned to her. "What you all refused to do." I stopped pretending. She took a hesitant step forward. We're family. I shook my head slowly. No, Mom. We were a hierarchy. You just never noticed the difference. My father's breathing grew heavy. You think this makes you powerful? He said. It makes you a vulture. It makes me free, I replied. And it makes this company solvent again. I reached for the papers, sliding them back into the briefcase. The board meets next Tuesday at 10. You can attend, of course, but as shareholders, not owners. I turned to leave, then paused. You wanted me back in the family business. Congratulations. Now you work for me. Isabel's hand slammed against the table. You'll regret this. Maybe, I said, glancing at her, but at least I'll regret it on my own terms. I walked out, my heels clicking against the marble floor, each step echoing through the empty halls like a countdown. For the first time in 16 years, I wasn't the one leaving in defeat. I was the one locking the door behind me. The next morning, Boston woke to headlines that burned across every business feed and news ticker. Solvian Tech acquires majority stake in Monroe Energy, a historic power shift in the energy sector. My father's empire was now officially under my control. Inside the Monroe estate, chaos bloomed. Phones rang, reporters camped outside the gates, and Isabel's voice echoed through the corridors as she barked orders that no one obeyed anymore. I stood at the top of the grand staircase watching the household I once feared descend into panic. Down below, Isabel slammed her phone onto the marble floor, the screen shattering. She ambushed us, she shouted. That ungrateful... She stopped when she saw me. You're enjoying this, aren't you? I'm observing, I said calmly. You should try it sometime. It's how people learn. She stormed toward me, eyes wild. You've humiliated us in front of the entire industry. You've destroyed everything. No, Isabel, I said, my tone quiet but cold. You destroyed everything. I just put the lights on so everyone could see it. Charles appeared behind her, pale, furious, disheveled. He looked smaller somehow, like the weight of losing control had shrunk him. You think this is victory? He demanded. You've betrayed your family. Family, I repeated softly. You mean the brand that used to trade my pain for profits? He flinched. You've made a mockery of our name. No, I said. You did that the day you covered up Daniel's death. The words landed like a strike. Isabel's face went white. You knew about that. I turned toward her. Of course he knew. He approved the report that blamed it on unforeseen mechanical failure. He signed it while you were celebrating your promotion. Isabel's mouth opened, then closed. She looked at our father in disbelief. Is that true? He didn't answer. His silence was confirmation enough. For the first time, Isabel's fury faltered, replaced by something raw and small betrayal. You said it was an accident, she whispered. You told me she overreacted. Charles rubbed his temples. It was business, Isabel. These things happen. Business. I said the word slicing through the air. You sacrificed people for quarterly gains. You buried the truth under profit margins. You buried my husband. His hand shook as he reached for the whiskey glass. You've made your point. What do you want now? Revenge. I stepped closer. No, Father. I already got justice. Now I'm here to watch you live with it. Isabel turned away, pacing her composure unraveling. You can't just waltz in and take over. The board will fight this. The board voted last night, I said. Unanimously. She froze. They wouldn't dare. They would. I said softly, and they did. The butler entered, then hesitant. There's media outside, sir. They're asking for a statement. Charles looked at me defeated. What do you expect me to tell them? I met his gaze steadily. Tell them the truth. For once. He swallowed hard, then looked down. The great Charles Monroe, who once ruled boardrooms with a glance, now looked like a man standing at the edge of something he couldn't control. As I turned to leave, my mother's voice followed me from the hallway. Rachel, wait. I stopped, but didn't turn. Please, she said softly. Don't destroy what's left. I exhaled, the anger simmering low. What's left, Mom, was destroyed long before I got here. I walked out the front doors into the cold morning light. Reporters shouted my name, cameras flashing. I didn't answer. I just kept walking toward the car, waiting at the end of the drive. Behind me, I could hear the shouting begin again, the chaos echoing down the marble halls. For years, I'd imagined this moment would feel triumphant. It didn't. It felt heavy. Victory, I was learning, had its own kind of grief. Because justice, when finally delivered, doesn't erase the pain, it only exposes who truly caused it. The rain came that night like penance. It streaked down the hotel window, blurring the Boston skyline into a smear of silver and shadow. I sat alone at the desk, the glow of my laptop reflecting off the merger contract signed, sealed, and final. Monroe Energy was officially a division of Solvian Tech. The empire that once erased me now existed under my name. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt hollow. The silence was deafening, the kind that followed long after the applause. Mason called just past midnight. "It's done," he said. The filings cleared, the market responded positively. "Stocks are already climbing." "Good," I murmured. "And the Monroes?" He hesitated. "Your father hasn't left the estate. Isabel was seen at her lawyer's office. Your mother, she declined interviews." "She would," I said softly. "She always declines." There was a pause. "Rachel, you did it," Mason said gently. "You won." I stared at the rain tracing lines across the glass. "Then why doesn't it feel like winning?" He didn't answer right away. "Because winning doesn't always mean peace," he said finally. "Sometimes it just means you're the last one standing." When he hung up, I closed the laptop and reached for the small wooden box tucked inside my bag. Daniel's wedding ring still rested inside, blackened from the fire, its gold edge warped by heat. I turned it over in my fingers. "We made it," I whispered. "Justice, remember." "You always said truth finds its way out." The words trembled in the quiet. "But you didn't tell me it would cost so much." I remembered that night 16 years ago, the sirens, the smoke, the metallic taste of grief. I'd spent years pretending I could outwork the pain. Build something cleaner, safer, better, but no empire, no acquisition, no corporate triumph could bring him back. Justice wasn't the same as healing. By morning, the rain had cleared, leaving a brittle kind of brightness. The headlines were relentless. Monroe Energy saved by daughter, it once disowned. The redemption of Rachel Monroe. The public loved a redemption arc. They didn't see the years it took to bleed for one. At noon, I visited the memorial site where Daniel's name was engraved among the others lost in the explosion. The plaque was cold under my hand. "It's fixed now," I told him quietly. "The safety systems, the funding, the protocols. No one else will die because of them." My voice broke. "But you still did." The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of oil and salt from the harbor. I closed my eyes. For 16 years, that smell had haunted me now. It only reminded me that nothing was ever fully washed clean. When I returned to the car, Mason was waiting, his expression careful. "There's a call from the board. They want your confirmation for the first integration meeting next week." I nodded. "Tell them I'll be there." "You sure you don't want to rest?" he asked. I looked back at the memorial in the distance. "Rest comes later, after rebuilding." He didn't push further. As the car pulled away, I watched the city slide by the glass towers, the old brick warehouses, the skyline Daniel used to call a machine that eats its own. He'd been right. Success always demands a sacrifice. When we reached the hotel, I asked Mason to leave the reports on the table. And Mason, he paused at the door. "Thank you for staying." He gave a small nod. "I didn't stay for them," he said. "I stayed for what you're trying to build." After he left, I poured a glass of whiskey, not to celebrate, but to remember. The amber liquid caught the morning light, glowing like memory itself. I lifted it slightly toward the window. "To you, Daniel," I whispered, "to everything we lost, and everything I'll make sure they never destroy again." Outside, the clouds began to part, but the city still looked gray. Victory, I thought, wasn't bright or loud. It was quiet, lonely, and always, always paid for in full. 2 days after the acquisition, the Monroe estate was quieter than I'd ever known it. The reporters were gone, the phone calls had stopped, and the silence inside felt heavier than any argument we'd ever had. I returned only because Mason had insisted. "You need to tie loose ends," he'd said. "You can't rebuild while ghosts are still walking." When I entered the study, Isabel was already there, a glass of whiskey shaking in her hand. Papers littered the floor around her like confetti after a failed celebration. "You came to gloat," she said flatly. "That's what this is, isn't it? Victory lap for the exiled daughter." I looked around at the chaos. "You've made quite the mess." "It's all that's left," she snapped. "You think they respect you? The board, the press. They love you because you're a headline. Wait until they find another tragedy to idolize." Her bitterness was sharp, but it was also desperate. "You had everything, Isabel," I said. "A father who handed you the keys, a company built on generations of power. And you squandered it." She laughed bitterly. "You talk like you didn't want it just as much." "I wanted it to mean something," I said quietly. "You wanted it to mean you." The door opened behind us. Charles stepped in slower now, his authority replaced by exhaustion. He looked smaller again, shoulders hunched, eyes sunken. "That's enough," he said weakly. "I won't have my daughters tearing each other apart." Isabel turned on him. "You don't get to talk about family now. You lied to me. You let me believe she overreacted. You made me your shield." Charles swallowed hard, looking at her as though seeing her for the first time. "I did what I thought was right." Isabel's laugh cracked. "Right? You signed off on the report that killed her husband. You made me take your side. You were too young to understand." "No," she cut in, voice rising. "You made me like you." The words hung in the air like a confession neither of them could take back. I watched my father's face collapse under their weight. He looked at me, then tired, broken. "Rachel, what do you want me to say?" "That I was wrong." "You were," I said. "But words don't fix what you burned down." My mother appeared in the doorway, clutching the frame like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "Please," she whispered. "All of you stop." Her voice shook, but for once it carried through the room. "Charles, you told me silence was loyalty. Isabel, you thought pride was love. And Rachel," she looked at me, her eyes full of apology, "you thought justice would heal everything, but it won't." Her honesty startled me. For the first time, she wasn't trying to make peace. She was naming the ruins. Isabel sank into a chair, head in her hands. "What happens now?" she whispered. I took a breath. "Now you rebuild if you can. The employees stay. The systems change. The name Monroe stays on the door for now, but it answers to Solvion Tech." Charles stared at me, his voice cracking. "And us. You live with what you've done," I said softly. "That's your sentence." He nodded, slowly defeated. "And you? What will you live with?" I hesitated. The truth came out before I could stop it. The cost of being right. When I left the room, my mother followed me to the door. "Rachel, she said you saved them even if they don't see it yet." I looked back at her, at the woman who had chosen silence for so long, but finally found her voice when everything else was gone. "No, Mom," I said. "I didn't save them. I just stopped letting them destroy me." Outside, the sun was setting a low red smear across the horizon. For the first time, I didn't look back at the house. Some homes weren't meant to be returned to. They were meant to be left standing as reminders of what happens when love rots into power. The boardroom of Solvion Tech was nothing like Monroe Energy's marble mausoleum. Here, the light was clean, the walls of glass looked out over the skyline, and the air hummed with quiet purpose. Still, as I stood before the new combined board that morning, I felt the past trailing behind me like a ghost. On one side of the long table sat the Solvion Tech directors, young, sharp, forward-thinking. On the other side, the remnants of the Monroe board, older men and women who still clung to the illusion of legacy. At the far end sat my father and Isabel, both looking like visitors in a world they no longer ruled. I began simply. 16 years ago, I was told I didn't understand business. That idealism was weakness, that people were numbers. Today, Monroe Energy joins Solvion Tech not as a conquest, but as a correction. The room was silent except for the soft clicking of pens. I continued. From this day forward, safety is not negotiable. Transparency is not optional. And leadership is earned, not inherited. I glanced at my father. His expression was unreadable, but his hands were clasped tightly on the table. One of the Solvion Tech board members spoke. "Ms. Reed, are we to understand you'll be assuming full control of operations?" "Yes," I said. "Effective immediately." I turned toward the Monroes. But I've also decided to retain several of Monroe's divisions. They will operate under Solvion Tech supervision. Those who adapt stay, those who don't leave. Isabel leaned forward. "You're making a mistake," she said. "You don't understand this industry's politics." I met her gaze. "Politics is what killed innovation at Monroe Energy. That ends now." She opened her mouth again, but my father's quiet voice stopped her. "Enough, Isabel." He stood slowly facing the room. "She's right." Everyone turned. Charles Monroe, the man who once controlled this entire sector, looked smaller under the fluorescent light. "We built a machine that consumed everything," he said, "and I fed it. I thought I was preserving a legacy. Instead, I destroyed one." He turned to me. "You were right, Rachel. I was wrong." His voice caught slightly. "I won't ask for forgiveness, but I will ask to help rebuild what I broke." For a moment, the room was still. Then I said, "You'll have a seat on the board as a non-executive advisor. No control, no veto power." He nodded. "Understood." Isabel's eyes widened. "Dad." "Enough," he said again, more firmly this time. He looked at her, his voice low. "You need to learn to start from the bottom, Isabel, for once." Her face flushed with humiliation, but she said nothing. The meeting continued for another hour, discussions of restructuring legal compliance new safety divisions. I spoke clearly, efficiently, but inside I was trembling. This was the moment I had chased for 16 years, and it didn't feel like triumph. It felt like a quiet reckoning between what I had built and what it had cost. When the meeting finally adjourned, I stayed behind, staring at the empty chairs. My father lingered near the door. "You've become everything I said you couldn't," he said quietly. "And nothing like what I feared." I looked at him, searching for sarcasm, but there was none. "You taught me one thing at least," I said. "Never depend on admiration to survive." He gave a faint smile. "Then you learned the right lesson." He hesitated. "I'll see you at the next meeting." After he left, I walked to the window, watching the city below. The streets pulsed with movement, ordinary people oblivious to the battles fought above them. For years, I thought revenge would be the final word. But standing there, I realized something else. Revenge ends the story. Justice begins it. Behind me, the boardroom was silent. The empire had shifted, and for the first time in its history, it was in the hands of someone who understood both the cost of power and the weight of mercy. 6 months later, the nameplate outside the building read Monroe Solvion Energy, the hyphen, a fragile piece between past and future. Inside, the hum of progress filled every floor. New engineers, new safety protocols, new beginnings carved out of old ruins. The transformation was painful but necessary. I spent those months working 18-hour days, rewriting policies, renegotiating contracts, replacing entire management tiers. Some called it ruthless. I called it repair. Charles had kept his word. He attended board meetings, quietly contributing without demanding control. His hair had gone whiter, his suit simpler, his tone subdued. He no longer barked orders. He asked questions. For a man like him, that was the closest thing to penance. Isabel, however, struggled. Her resignation came in a short email with no signature. She disappeared from the industry headlines within weeks. Last I heard, she had moved to Colorado to find herself. Maybe she'd finally learn what humility looked like. My mother visited often. She had joined the Solvion Foundation. I'd launched a fund dedicated to supporting families affected by industrial negligence. At first, she volunteered quietly, sorting donation boxes in the background. But over time, she found her voice. "You can't rebuild by erasing what happened," she told me one afternoon. "You rebuild by making sure it doesn't happen again." I realized then that she had finally stopped being a bystander. That same week, the company hit record profits for the first time since the merger. Reporters called it the redemption quarter. They loved the narrative, the disowned daughter turned savior. I played along because every headline helped fund the foundation, but privately I knew better. Redemption wasn't a headline, it was a daily battle with guilt, forgiveness, and restraint. Late one evening, I found myself walking through the old Monroe Energy plant, the site of the explosion that had taken Daniel's life. It was now converted into a renewable research facility. The smell of oil and smoke had long since faded, replaced by the faint ozone scent of new machinery. I stood where the blast had started, feeling the cool hum of generators vibrating beneath my feet. Charles joined me there unexpectedly. "I never came back after it happened," he said quietly. "Couldn't face it." I didn't answer. He looked around at the vast space eyes reflecting both pride and shame. "You rebuilt this," he said. "You turned the worst thing I ever did into something that matters." I crossed my arms, staring at the floor. "You could have done that yourself. Years ago. I wasn't the person then that I am now," he said. "Maybe that's your real victory." I turned to face him. "Victory isn't what I wanted. Accountability was." He nodded slowly. "You got it?" He hesitated, then reached into his coat pocket. "There's something you should have." He handed me a small metal tag, bent scorched, barely legible. "They found it in the rubble after the accident. I kept it all these years. It's Daniel's." My breath caught. The name was still faintly visible. D. Reed. "Why didn't you tell me you had this?" I asked. "Because I didn't deserve to," he said. "Not until now." For the first time in 16 years, I saw my father's eyes without the armor of pride. Just a man who had finally met the weight of his choices. I slipped the tag into my pocket. "You can't undo what you did," I said, "but you can live the rest of your life trying to balance it." He nodded once. "That's the plan." As he turned to leave, the lights above flickered on, illuminating the rebuilt facility, bright, steady, alive. The ghosts were still there, but they were quieter now. Maybe because they finally believed the living were listening. For the first time since the fire, I let myself breathe without guilt. Not because everything was fixed, but because at last it was finally being made right. A year later, the Monroe estate no longer felt like a battlefield. The portraits had been rehung this time, with everyone included, even me. The old mahogany had been polished. The air smelled of rosemary and roasted vegetables, and for the first time in 16 years, laughter drifted faintly through the hall. It wasn't loud or confident, but hesitant, fragile, the sound of people trying to begin again. When I stepped into the dining room, my mother looked up first. "You came," she said, voice gentle but full of relief. "I said I would," I replied, handing her a bottle of wine. "Daniel's favorite." She smiled sadly. "Then he's here with us tonight." My father was already seated thinner now, quieter. The oxygen of arrogance that once filled every room he entered had been replaced by something else, acceptance. He stood the motion slow but deliberate. "You look well," he said. "And you sound better," I answered. "I guess we both survived." Isabel arrived a few minutes later. She had changed, no tailored suit, no designer jewelry, just a soft cardigan and tired eyes. She sat across from me without speaking. For a long moment, the only sound was the clinking of silverware. Then finally she said, "I saw the article about the foundation. What you're doing, it's good." I nodded. "It's necessary." "Still," she said quietly, "you didn't have to name it after him. You could have named it after yourself." I looked at her across the table. "That's the point, Isabel. It was never about me." My father cleared his throat. "Before we eat, I need to say something." The room fell silent. "I can't undo what I did," he said slowly, "but I can learn from it. You've done more in 1 year than I did in 40. I'm proud of you, Rachel." The words hung in the air, words I'd wanted to hear since I was 22. Now that they were here, they didn't feel triumphant. They felt heavy, real, earned. "Thank you," I said finally. "But don't be proud of what I built. Be proud that you finally learned to listen." He gave a small, humbled smile. "Fair enough." Dinner passed in awkward peace. Small talk about projects, the weather, the staff my mother had rehired. When dessert came, she placed a homemade chocolate cake on the table. "Your favorite," she said softly. The smell hit me with memories of another lifetime. "You remembered." "I never forgot," she said. After dinner, my father asked if we could walk through the garden. The night air was cool, the flowers blooming under the soft glow of path lights. "You rebuilt this place too," he said, gesturing to the restored fountain. "I didn't rebuild it," I said. "I made it livable." We stopped near the old oak tree. He looked at me, his voice low. "You were right about everything. The company, the truth, the way I treated you." "I wish I'd seen it sooner." "I wish you had too," I said. "But regret doesn't fix history, it just writes its own footnotes." He nodded, eyes glistening. Then let me start there. When I returned inside, Isabel was helping my mother clear the dishes. For the first time, I noticed how carefully she handled the plates, as if aware of how easily things could break. She looked up at me and said quietly, "I'm not ready to forgive you, but I'm ready to try." "That's enough," I said. Later, when everyone was gone, I lingered in the empty dining room. The candles burned low, their light soft against the glass windows. On the wall near the door hung a new portrait our family painted from an old photo taken before everything fell apart. Only this time, no one had been erased. I took a deep breath and texted Mason dinner's over. It went better than expected. He replied a minute later. "Told you they'd come around. See you at the board meeting Monday." I smiled faintly, slipping my phone into my bag. Some stories don't end with revenge or ruin. Some end with something quieter, harder, more human, a chance to make things right. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, carrying away the last of the bitterness. For the first time in 16 years, the Monroe name didn't feel like a curse. It felt like closure, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of peace.